This is what the process of directing a comedy series for the BBC looks like. Every show is different, of course, but I want to share my experience of the process behind directing a comedy series for the BBC back in the summer of 2019. It was a 10-episode series, with each episode running to 20 minutes. A comedy sketch show, but with a sort of linear narrative. Honestly, not typically my sense of humour, but it was a lot of fun to film. In a recent video, I talked about a circumstance where it wasn't what you knew, but who you knew. And there's definitely an element of that here, but I just want to be clear up front that I didn't know these people to begin with. I only came to know them through working and through friendships that came from working. Back in my early to mid-20s, I was working full-time for a production company, which was part of a larger media group. And one of the people at this media group came to be my friend Adam, who, after leaving said media group, I came to travel the world with. Adam eventually fell into talent management, which then led to him asking me for some advice for one of his clients who was a TikTok star, but hoping to break into mainstream acting, the talented Miss Amelia Gething. They wanted to film a load of skits, but with a high production value. When they told me the sort of budget they were working to, I said, "You're not going to get anyone decent for that sort of money, but I guess I could do you a favour just this once," which then stemmed into me doing probably about 8 or 9 different favours over the course of a year. With a lot of social numbers under our belt, it wasn't long before the BBC reached out, saying that they'd love to create a pilot for a series in the same vein as these sketches we were shooting. And after an initial meeting with the producer of this pilot, and she'd come down to set to see how it worked, I was asked if I'd like to make it. Half a year later, and the pilot was ultimately successful. In the interim, however, the producer had got pregnant and was planning to take a whole year off. This meant a new producer based in a different part of the country. And it meant that I had to basically apply for the role of directing the actual series, which at the time I was definitely a bit miffed about, because I felt like I directed this pilot and I shot this pilot, and inevitably, being me, I ended up editing this pilot so we could spend more money on the grade. So why is it not just straight up me that's going to be directing the series? Surely. But that's not how it works. I was up against 2 other comedy directors, both with more experience in the area than me. I had several phone calls with the new producer and the exec. They asked me a lot of questions, I asked them a lot of questions. I thought I'd probably lost my chance when they told me the DOP that they wanted me to work with. I quickly looked up his IMDb whilst on the call to find that he'd only shot the worst of British television. And I was immediate to say if I was directing it, I'd want the series to look the best it could do within its limitations, and that would mean not working with a daytime soap DOP. There was a lot of this is the way we normally do things, and I just wasn't cool with all of that, so I thought there's a good chance this isn't going to happen. But then ultimately, a few weeks later, I had a call with the boss man and I got the job. Before my block of paid for pre-production had even started, there was a whole ton of meetings with cast, crew and recce's to be done. The producer on this show was heavily involved in the writing process. Way ahead of my involvement, a team of about 12 writers were brought together. They'd meet every few weeks in a writing room, and then they'd go off and work on their own individual sketches and scenes. For me, my paid pre-production began just 4 weeks before shooting. Even having successfully directed the pilot, I felt a little bit out of my depth leading up to the show.
I know this is comedy, but how am I going to be able to get the best performances? And what's the best way to work with a crew of this many people, which I'm not normally used to working with?
I actually made a video on how I did a lot of my research here, but I'll also leave a link in the description. Despite having recorded the pilot in London, because of the change in producer, the production was now going to be in Manchester. Those first 4 weeks were full of meetings with every single possible department, regularly sitting down with poor art department who had close to 1,000 props to be sourced and created. The scripts were really heavy with visual effects, and being brought in at this stage, it was way too late to be saying we can't do this. So it was more a case of, okay, with our limited budget, where we can't afford a visual effects supervisor and a great VFX house to do the effects, how is this possible to achieve with just my own knowledge and one poor soul working in After Effects? This was a huge challenge in itself. I was trying to spend time going through the scripts, breaking down each scene, creating shot lists, drawing the odd storyboard when it came to VFX, so I could explain what was going on to myself, the DP, the AE artist, and the cast and crew. I thought, there's 10 episodes, the scripts aren't that long, I'll have easily done all of this in a week. But cut to 4 weeks later, having filled up my time with meetings, castings, script decisions, and everything else under the sun, I was not even halfway through going through all the scripts, which is mad. 4 weeks, and I wasn't working short days. It was full on. There were quite a lot of scenes with question marks over them as to runtime, Once the script supervisor was on board, she expressed concerns that it was going to run fairly over. And we knew we were going to be tight on the timing of the shoot schedule-wise. So I was pushing to cull whatever we possibly could. The actual production itself was shooting for a total of 6 weeks, with a small break in the middle for production to catch up on itself. This ultimately meant that we had about 2.5 days per episode to shoot everything, which is nuts. Even if it is only 20 minutes long, that's a lot of stuff to shoot, especially with visual effects, some ridiculous hair and makeup, and all whilst everyone's trying their very best in the time and circumstance for it to not look shit. There was, for me at least, a big crew. This included an executive producer, a series producer, a director, a script supervisor, a first assistant director, a second assistant director, a third assistant director, a production manager, production coordinator, a production secretary, a DOP, 2 camera assistants, a gaffer, 2 sparks,
sometimes 3, a gimbal operator on some days, a location manager, a sound recordist, a boom op,
a production designer, a standby art director, a props buyer, multiple art department assistants, a standby chippy, a technical runner, hair and makeup times 3, possibly 4, a costume designer, plus assistants, and most importantly, catering staff, who were there every day for breakfast, lunch, and afternoon snacks. Oh yes, and forecast, and nobody knows how many extras, but a lot. There were days when the higher-ups would visit, days when the editor came to set, days when the After Effects wizard came to set, and days when press came to set. There was never enough time, but the food was always awesome. What is not uncommon for shows to do, but was really hectic and confusing, was not getting to shoot sequentially. We had to shoot whatever was the most efficient way to do it in terms of timing, which didn't make everything always particularly easy for everyone to understand, myself included.
Turn it over, speed.
54, take 1.
Quiet! This is massively in the context of first world privilege when I say this, so take it with a pinch of salt. But it was really tough shooting this show. The hours were incredibly long. Even at the end of a very long day, I then found myself holed up in my hotel room playing catch up for tomorrow's scenes because I simply hadn't had enough time in pre-production. For the most part, the weekends didn't exist. Again, because I was either playing catch up or I was just totally dead. I had no energy. I was struggling keeping a relationship together, traveling back and forth between London and Manchester. And it was ultimately just really, really draining, but very rewarding. There's something about these productions that last from several months to a year where you really create a tight-knit community of people all working together for a common cause, something that everyone feels passionate about, which I find is definitely not the case in commercial, brand and music video world, where people are just there for the day rate and a number of crew members might not care less about what they're making. Incredibly oddly, but apparently not uncommon for this particular department of the BBC, by the time it came to post-production, there was no budget left for me. I knew this from the outset, but I still found it odd that once the cameras were down, I wasn't going to be involved at all. And the edit was going on for nearly 2 months. It was just one single editor and the producer. I get sent the occasional scene for feedback, but I really got the impression this was just to keep me happy. It was a real shame to let something that I put so much care, time and effort into go like that at such a crucial stage, but it was what it was, due to both budgetary constraints and a case of that's how they do it. Budget is obviously always normally the largest limitation when it comes to productions, but on this occasion it wasn't necessarily the budget's fault. It was the higher-ups not wanting to sign off on some of my decisions crew-wise. On this show, I worked with the incredibly hard-working and talented DOP, Kieran O'Brien. I don't think anyone else would have been physically capable of achieving as many pages in as few days as we did. But Kieran wasn't my first choice DOP. I was shooting in a different direction at first. There were others before him, but they were not signed off on. The other biggest things were due to budget constraints. I was told that we had to go with the cheapest of the 3 post-production quotes, which included edits by an editor whose tastes differ quite greatly to mine, and a grade by a colorist who normally works on daytime TV soaps. It was quite heartbreaking for both myself and the DP to see all of the camera and lighting department's hard work go to poop as soon as they got their hands on it. But to be fair, even my preferred colorist would have had a hard time making this their best work, as there was only 2 days budgeted per episode to grade. So many lessons were learned, but the biggest one being to be more pushy for pre-production time. 4 weeks was never going to be enough. I should have insisted they brought me on earlier, and if it had been a no, then I just shouldn't have done the job. And lastly, how much did I make? I'm pretty pathetic for this stage in my career, £300 a day, which accumulated to a total of 15 grand over the whole period. But due to the weird way in which the BBC like to work, they were not covering crew expenses because the crew had to be locally based due to some stupid rule that the BBC have about fairness in the workplace, and London, Manchester, Glasgow, whatever. They've got targets that they have to hit, or at least this is the possible lie that I was told, in order to not pay for my accommodation. So when I couldn't stay for free with my best mate, who happens to live in Manchester, and I needed to stay in hotels when we were on locations that were further out, I had to pay for it myself. So really, that 15 grand was more like 12 grand. Working on this more long-form project was definitely one of the more intense, life-changing and lesson-learning projects of my career so far. I loved it, but at what cost? At the end of it, I'd made very little money for the time I'd been involved in it. I was exhausted, and my personal and social life was in ruins. I think this is quite often the case with a lot of people on longer form production. It's really hard to strike that work-life balance when your whole life becomes the thing that you're working on. That having been said, I'd love to do it again. Not this particular show. I did say no to the second season, but at some point in the next decade, I would really love to do something long form again, taking the lessons learnt from this production and trying my very best not to let it destroy my personal life whilst I'm doing it. I hope you found some of that helpful, and more importantly, that I wasn't out of focus the whole time I was recording this because I haven't got my monitor with me. Check out this video on directing actors, which is directly related to the show. And if you still haven't, make sure to subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.